Senua's Saga Hellblade 2 was, and most probably will continue to be, a very controversial game. I initially disliked the idea of it. I was confused as to why there wasn't any marketing for it, and now I kind of get it. So, no faffing around, let's give this one an honest review.
It's death. Ink and blood.
Yes, you can see it, can't you? Blood on your hands.
Hellblade 2 has been recognized by every facet of the gaming community for its striking visuals, and it was incredibly obvious why, from start to finish. It's worth noting that all of the footage you're looking at throughout my playthrough is, believe it or not, recorded with low settings in-game. It's upscaled using DLSS, but even so, if this is what is considered a low preset, it's remarkable. One of my earliest remarks about Hellblade 2 as soon as the trailer launched was that the visuals seemed too good. There was barely any marketing for the game, barely any details had been revealed about the story or the new gameplay mechanics, and so my first thoughts were that Hellblade 2 was going to be no more than a tech demo to showcase the capabilities of Unreal Engine 5, and in many ways, I was right. There are, I'd say, 10 to 15 major environments throughout this game. Not so much levels per se, as they all intertwine very well. It's similar to God of War. Each and every one of these environments was visually jaw-dropping, from the opening moments where Senua is scaling some rocky cliffs in the rain, cinematic pieces where the environments are trying to tear you to pieces, and dark underground caverns forcing you to deal with tight spaces and the anxiety that comes along with that. Every single one of these areas showcased how remarkable Unreal Engine 5 was and how much time and attention had gone into each of these environments to make them look and feel like the most vivid interpretations of our fantasies as gamers. Everything from the textures of the rock walls to the trees and the forests felt like we were ticking off a wish list for things we would like to see in a modern Elder Scrolls game. It all felt so alive and so immersive. So credit where credit is due, the visuals are astounding. Dare I say, some of the best that I have ever experienced in a video game.
This is the turning point, Austin. We can start over. Start to rebuild what we had.
Does she trust Wagner?
With that said, visuals don't make up for a lack of story. Now, there are some really wonderful notes sprinkled throughout Hellblade 2, and we do develop Senua's character a little more by the end of the game. No spoilers here, but you can definitely feel that. With the game's strong focus on mental health and mental health illnesses, I believe that should have been, and definitely was, the primary focus. But again, with that said, I'm sure many of you have heard by this point that Hellblade 2 is an incredibly short game. My total playtime as an average gamer was around 7 to 8 hours. In total, I would say around 65 to 70% of that was traversal, puzzle solving, and a bit of combat, which by the way is awesome, and we'll dive into that a little bit later. The rest of the game is story, cutscenes, figuring out what the next objective is going to be. Those cutscenes, and pretty much all of the characters we meet along the way, are incredibly linear, and the story itself is incredibly linear. Hellblade 2 sets you on a path that is very hard to deviate from or get any sense of exploration, and that sucks. But listen, I'm not trying to spoil the game for those who haven't already played it, but it really feels like we just rock up somewhere at the start of the game. We're given this giant objective just out of nowhere that actually has nothing to do with us, and then we kind of work our way through some of the bad guys until we reach the end of the game.
I need to go home.
Will your father join us if you tell him what you saw?
Yes. He will not run from battle. He will lead us into it.
And that's not to say that the game wasn't fun at all, because it was, but compared to pretty much all of the other AAA titles you could look at right now, hell, even compared to the first game, Senua's Sacrifice, you can't help but feel that all the attention went onto the environments, and then there were a few writers left over at the end of the creative process, and they were like, all right, how do we piece all this together? I didn't really care for any of the side characters really, and even some of the main storylines of the game felt dragged out to increase average playtime. Senua is such an interesting character, and Hellblade is a truly remarkable and unique series. It It kind of makes sense why they didn't show much in terms of marketing and trailers and even gameplay elements, because I feel like if they had shown any more than they did, they would have given too much away. Even from my silly little review you're watching now, you could probably piece together what happens, and a game like Hellblade 2 deserves more than that. Another area of the game that does deserve some love is the motion capture, animations, and combat, all that good stuff.
Killed my son! You're nothing.
Hellblade 2 has hands down the best motion capture I have ever experienced in a video game. Every facial expression, every tremor, every swing of Senua's sword feels lifelike. You can feel the weight in every action. They all had tiny, painstaking, minuscule little details poured into them, making the cutscenes all feel remarkably engaging. The combat is particularly awesome, but is also incredibly flawed at the same time. The combat mechanics, much like the first game, are focused on parrying, dodging, and blocking, and swinging where you can. The first few hours of Hellblade 2's combat feels so cool. Every parry, every combo feels so rewarding. When an enemy counters some of your movements, it genuinely catches you off guard, forcing you to pay more attention to their movements and their patterns. It's not on the same level of Elden Ring's parrying and dodging capabilities and things like that, but you definitely have to pay attention to everything that is going on screen at one time. But then the negatives set in, and you realize that there are only 3 or 4 types of enemies in the whole game, and once you can kind of anticipate their movements, they start to feel really mundane. Even on the highest difficulty settings, the dodge and parrying mechanics are very forgiving, and the worst part about it all is that there are so few fights because of the length of the game.
Do you hate?
For a general structure, your playthrough will go something like cutscene, travel, puzzle, fight. Repeat that a couple of times and the credits will roll. Now, this wouldn't be a big issue with most other titles because you'd experience a bunch of new things throughout the 30, 40, or 50 hours of gameplay. You'd unlock new abilities, there's things that you want to try, things to swap out with, but with Hellblade 2, you only really have 10-ish fight sequences throughout the whole game. To make matters worse, within the first, I'd say, half hour of the game, you're given Senua's mirror, which basically allows you to take out any enemy, interrupt their attacks, and just cheese the whole game. Obviously, you could just choose not to use it, it's not mandatory, but it's literally the only accessory or power-up type thing you get throughout the whole game, so you want to use it, and the animation is cool, but it does kind of kill the experience. In terms of boss fights, there are a few mini-bosses that have unique moves and things that might catch you off guard, but even the final boss, which isn't the one you're looking at right now for the sake of spoilers and whatnot, took about 4 minutes and 1 attempt to take down. There are meant to be super duper bosses that you can take on throughout your playthrough, like the giants shown in the trailer, but these encounters aren't combat based. They have their own little stages that you need to complete, most of which are traversal, and 2 of which are copy and pasted from each other with different weather conditions and elements for you to battle along the way. This all ties in with the story, so it makes sense, but there's no action here. Honestly, it's not even worth talking about.
Don't let it rule your mind.
That's it.
I can fight things I can see.
Yes.
Things that bleed when struck with a spear. I'm lost here.
She's changed.
I know how you feel.
We know.
Believe me.
One of the most important and unique elements of the first game, Senua's Sacrifice, was Senua's ability to be able to hear different voices and such like that would narrate her journey and give tips and, at many points, doubts.
Can't you hear them, Senua? Can't you hear their screams?
I can hear them.
The voices are an interesting returning feature and do add a lot of depth to Senua's journey, but Senua as a character has reached a point where she's learning not to listen to the doubts, fighting them as she becomes stronger as a character, and this is awesome to see from a story and character development perspective. It makes you feel connected to the character you're playing as, more so than many other characters in other games. You're not just experiencing their emotions with a piece of dialogue or in the middle of a cutscene, you're there with them from start to finish, every fear being stuck in a dark cave. You're experiencing that with Senua.
If we defeat her, his world will collapse. Like yours.
You're pushing her to conquer her fears as the voices in her head tell her that it's pointless and that she'll never escape. For me, this is what makes Hellblade 2 stand out more than anything else. Yes, the visuals are incredible, but it's tiny elements like this that make the series so different from everything else out there.
You have to show them a different way. You have to redeem them.
Audio in general throughout the game is great. There's less of a focus on the binaural elements that the previous game had and introduced to many players, but there is still an absolute feast for those who enjoy it. Music is scarce, but when it's playing in cutscenes and intense little situations, it's done beautifully and tastefully. Hellblade 2 does have weak points, but there's nothing that would put me off the game or would have discouraged me from buying it. Sure, the story is short and lackluster, and the combat sequences are few and far between, but I feel like most of that could have been forgiven if the game was just fun to play. But the biggest downfall of this game, outside of all of those other elements that we've spoken about, is the fun stuff. Puzzles in this game, unlike the first, could barely be considered puzzles. They're just switches. Turn this thing on that lets you access this other switch. Boop, let's deactivate the first one and continue. That's it. That is every single puzzle in this game. There weren't any puzzles in this game that I personally found challenging, and in fact the most challenging thing is the fact that the developers made Senua walked so slowly. The only reason the puzzles in Hellblade 2 took me longer than 2 to 3 minutes to solve is simply because they put a decent amount of space and obstacles between each objective that you need to walk to and from in order to hit the switch. If they had given Senua a normal walking speed or put all the puzzles a little bit closer together, the game would have wrapped in 4 to 5 hours. And then you have the side quests. There aren't any at all. There are these little collectible things which are pretty cool, but you don't really have to do anything special to collect them. You just have to stare at these little rocks that look like faces in order to grab a collectible, and if you take a path that isn't what the story wants you to take, you get a little bit of lore. And the worst part is, even if you choose to go ahead and collect all of these, the only reward you get is the option to listen to what they said again. Ugh. I had really hoped that by collecting them all and enduring even more slow-paced walking, I would have unlocked some kind of special ending or secret item, but nope. There's one bonus feature that you unlock by completing the game anyway that I'm not going to spoil. Google it if you're interested, but again, it feels very lackluster.
All her life she has been alone. She chose it. A shield to keep her heart from harm. A hymn to still the other voices, the ones outside. Not anymore.
Alright, so final thoughts on Hellblade 2. I've been very critical of this game, more so than any I reviewed on this channel before. With those complaints in mind, do I regret the purchase or the time invested? Not really, but I can't recommend it. I've enjoyed revisiting this fascinating character and this dark, twisted world that Ninja Theory have created, which definitely stands out from the crowd. I've enjoyed getting a glimpse of what the future of gaming will look like in terms of visuals, but I can't walk away from my 7 to 8 hour experience with this game wanting to promote it or to encourage other people to play it. This is a completely unbiased review, of course, but there are games on this channel that I've wanted to big up and shout from the rooftop about how great of an experience I've had with them, and I can't do that with Hellblade 2. It's an average game with a few pieces of excellence thrown in. Absolutely give Hellblade 2 a chance if you have access to the Xbox Game Pass already, but don't go out of your way to buy it. I hope that a third iteration of Senua's story is made in the future. I want a sequel. I want to keep learning more about this world and this character and where things go from here. But I don't want it to be just a showpiece. I want it to be one of the best gaming experiences that I know Ninja Theory can create. That's all for today. Let me know how you feel about Hellblade 2 in the comments, and subscribe if you want to see more gaming content just like this. I love your faces, you're amazing, you're beautiful, and I'll catch you in the next one.